For months, whispers moved faster than truth. In every corner of the church, in every quiet conversation after service, people spoke in low voices, not about faith, not about sermons, but about him and his wife. Pastor Jamal Bryant, a man who once stood tall on the stage of faith, now stood under the shadow of questions. Every Sunday when he walked up to the pulpit, all eyes followed him, not because of what he was going to preach, but because everyone was waiting to see if he would finally say something. His smile seemed weaker, his words heavier, and his pauses longer than before. People could feel it, something wasn't right. Rumors had spread like wildfire, stories about fights, distance, and a broken home behind closed doors. Some said his wife had left him, others claimed they were only pretending to stay together. No one knew the truth, but everyone wanted to. And yet, he stayed silent. He kept preaching about forgiveness, patience, and love, while people whispered that he couldn't even hold his own marriage together. The more he stayed quiet, the louder the rumors grew, until one day, he finally decided to speak. Not as a pastor, not as a public figure, but as a man who had finally reached his breaking point. That day, something changed, and what he admitted left the whole congregation in tears. Before the rumors, before the headlines, there was just a man and a woman, two people who believed their love was built on faith. Pastor Jamal Bryant wasn't always a famous name. He started small, with a rented hall, a handful of people, and a dream to spread hope. His voice carried warmth, his words had power, and people were drawn to his honesty. That's when he met her, the woman who would become his wife. She wasn't from the spotlight. She liked quiet mornings, family dinners, and staying away from attention. But when they stood together, something about them felt right. They looked like balance, his boldness and her calm, his passion and her peace. When they married, the church celebrated like it was their own victory. Together, they became the picture of strength and devotion. People admired them, the perfect couple, they would say. Every photo, every Sunday sermon, every public appearance made it seem like nothing could ever shake their bond. But life doesn't stay in pictures. Behind the smiles, small cracks started to form. As the church grew, so did the pressure. His time was no longer his own. He was always needed somewhere, by someone. Meetings, interviews, sermons, and social media, it all began to swallow his peace. His wife tried to keep up, but loneliness slowly found its way into their home. Late dinners turned cold, conversations grew shorter, and laughter became rare. She never complained publicly. She stood beside him, as a pastor's wife should, but inside, she was fading. Still, they held on. They prayed together, tried to rebuild, but the distance only grew. And soon, the whispers began. People noticed they didn't arrive together anymore. She stopped sitting in the front row during his sermons. And in a world that feeds on curiosity, it didn't take long before the whispers became rumors. Rumors that would soon become H. As weeks turned into months, the silence around Pastor Jamal and his wife began to feel louder than words. Every Sunday, people still filled the church, but the atmosphere had changed. They came not just for sermons anymore, they came looking for signs. Did he mention her name? Did she attend the service? Was he wearing his wedding ring today? Small details became big conversations. A missed smile became proof. A solo photo turned into a hint. Social media pages started buzzing with theories, some claiming they were separated, others saying it was all a cover-up. Everyone had a version, but no one had the truth. The media picked up the story next. Online articles with bold headlines appeared overnight. Trouble in paradise? And is Pastor Bryant hiding something? Every post, every video clip of him preaching got analyzed frame by frame. Some even slowed down his speeches to catch his expressions, trying to read guilt where there was only exhaustion. His wife, tired of the noise, stepped away from the spotlight completely. She stopped attending church events, stopped appearing in photos. To her, silence felt safer than defending herself against strangers. But the more she stayed quiet, the more people talked. Jamal tried to focus on his work, but the weight followed him everywhere, in meetings, at sermons, even in prayer. People who once came to seek guidance now came to seek gossip. His closest friends began asking, "Are you okay?" His replies were always short, "I'm fine," but he wasn't. Behind closed doors, he battled sleepless nights and the heavy guilt of neglect. Not guilt for something scandalous, but guilt for not seeing how fame and duty had taken him away from the person who once gave him peace. Still, he refused to speak publicly. He thought silence would protect them, that rumors would fade on their own. But silence, he learned, doesn't kill rumors, it feeds them. Until one morning, as he looked at his reflection before Sunday service, he realized he couldn't run from it anymore. The people deserved the truth. His wife deserved honesty, and his heart, his faith, needed release. It was a quiet Sunday morning. The church hall was filled as usual, but that day the air felt heavier, like everyone could sense something was about to happen. Pastor Jamal walked up to the pulpit slowly, holding his Bible the same way he always did, but there was something different in his eyes. He looked tired, not from work, but from silence. He started his sermon as usual, talking about faith, endurance, and the importance of truth. But halfway through, his voice began to tremble. He stopped for a moment, looked down, and then said, softly, "Today, I can't preach the way I usually do. I've carried something in my heart for too long, and it's time I let it out." The church went silent. Even the sound of the fans seemed to fade away. People leaned forward, waiting. He took a deep breath and continued, "I know you've all heard things. I know there have been whispers, stories, and judgments. I thought silence would protect my family, but I was wrong. Silence only made things worse. So today, I want to tell you my truth, not to defend myself, but to be free." He paused again, gathering strength. Then, with a calm but emotional tone, he said, "The truth is, I failed my wife. Not in the way the world thinks, but in the ways that matter most. I became so focused on being a good pastor that I forgot to be a good husband. I gave my best to the pulpit and left my home with what was left of me. I stopped listening, stopped showing up, and somewhere in between sermons and schedules, I lost sight of her heart." Murmurs filled the hall, some surprised, some moved to tears. But he didn't stop. "She never betrayed me. She never gave up on me. It was me who let distance grow between us. Pride made me hide our struggles, and fear made me pretend everything was fine. But the truth is, love doesn't survive on pretense. It needs honesty." For a moment, he looked up, his eyes moist but steady. "I don't stand here to make excuses. I stand here because my faith taught me that confession is the first step to healing. I want to be a man who leads not just with words, but with truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable." When the service ended, there was a deep stillness in the room. People didn't rush out like they usually did. Some sat quietly with their heads bowed, others wiped their eyes. Pastor Jamal stood there for a few seconds, unsure if he had done the right thing, but for the first time in months, his heart felt lighter. That evening, he went home, found his wife sitting by the window, reading quietly like she always used to. The soft glow of the lamp fell across her face, and for a moment, he saw the woman he had fallen in love with years ago, patient, gentle, and strong. He walked up slowly and said in a low voice, "I told them the truth today." She looked up at him, calm and steady. "I know," she said softly. "I watched the live stream." He lowered his head, not sure what to say next. But before he could speak, she stood up and took his hand. "You don't need to explain anymore," she whispered. "You finally did what I've been praying for you. Stop pretending that everything was perfect." Tears filled his eyes as he realized how much grace she still carried, even after everything. "I hurt you," he said quietly. "Not by leaving, but by not being there when you needed me." She nodded slowly. "Yes, you did. But I've made peace with it. I learned that forgiveness isn't about who's right or wrong, it's about who's willing to heal." For the first time in a long while, they sat together and talked not as a pastor and his wife, but as two people trying to rebuild what fame, pride, and silence had broken. There were tears, apologies, and long pauses, but also laughter, the kind they thought they'd lost forever. Days turned into weeks, and slowly their bond started to heal. They began spending quiet evenings together again, going for walks, sharing stories, praying side by side. People in the church noticed a change, not the fake smiles of a picture-perfect couple, but the calm peace of two people who had fought for their love and won. When Jamal returned to the pulpit the next Sunday, his wife was there sitting in the front row again. She wasn't there for show. She was there because she chose to be. And when he looked at her during his sermon, there was no guilt in his eyes anymore, only gratitude. He spoke about forgiveness that day, and his words came from a place of experience, not theory. He ended the message with simple but powerful words. Redemption doesn't erase the past. It just proves that love can survive it. The crowd stood and clapped not just for him, but for what he represented that day. Honesty, humility, and the kind of love that refuses to give up. The days after, his confession felt different. The noise that once filled social media began to fade. Where there used to be rumors and criticism, now there were messages of support and prayers. People wrote things like, "He reminded us that even leaders are human, and this is what honesty looks like." Of course, not everyone believed him. Some still whispered, some still doubted. But Pastor Jamal no longer felt the need to prove anything. For the first time in years, he had peace, because he wasn't hiding anymore. His wife, who had once stayed away from the spotlight, began coming to church again, not as the pastor's wife people talked about, but as a woman who had learned the power of quiet strength. She stood beside him, not for appearances, but because forgiveness had rebuilt what silence had almost destroyed. Their bond grew slowly, carefully, like something fragile, learning to breathe again. They spent more time together, dinners at home, late-night talks, small prayers before bed. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that's what mattered now. One Sunday, during service, Jamal spoke about the lesson he learned through all of it. His voice was steady, his eyes calm. He said, "When you live in the public eye, people will always build stories about you. Some true, some false. But the real battle isn't to silence them, it's to stay truthful to yourself and to those who truly know your heart." The crowd listened quietly because his words carried the weight of experience. He wasn't preaching anymore, he was sharing. After the service, people lined up not to ask questions, but to thank him. Many said his story gave them courage to face their own struggles, to forgive, to speak up, to heal. Over time, the same church that once whispered about him now spoke about his honesty. His story became a reminder that strength isn't about perfection, it's about standing tall, even after you've fallen. And through it all, his wife remained his silent strength, the proof that grace isn't just a word from the Bible, it's something you live, even when it hurts. Time passed, and life slowly settled into a quiet peace. The rumors that once filled every corner eventually faded like echoes in an empty hall. People moved on to new stories, new topics, but for Pastor Jamal and his wife, this chapter would always stay with them. It wasn't a story of scandal. It was a story of two imperfect people who lost their way and found it again through grace. It was about honesty that took courage and forgiveness that took strength. In the end, Jamal learned something that no sermon could ever teach, that love isn't proven by how perfect it looks, but by how much truth it can survive. He realized that the greatest confession isn't the one made with words, but the one made through change. Every time he stepped on that pulpit now, he spoke with a softer tone, a gentler heart. He didn't preach to impress anymore, he preached to connect. His pain had turned into purpose, and his weakness had become his wisdom. His wife once said something that stayed with him forever. You don't lose people because of storms. You lose them when you stop standing with them in the rain. Those words became the foundation of their new life standing together, no matter how hard the winds blew. And maybe that's what faith really is, not the absence of struggle, but the strength to stay when things fall apart. The story of Pastor Jamal Bryant and his wife reminds us that truth may hurt, but it heals deeper than any lie ever could. It reminds us that forgiveness isn't about forgetting, it's about choosing love again, even when it would be easier to walk away. Because sometimes the bravest thing a person can say isn't "I'm right," it's "I'm sorry." And the most beautiful words that can ever follow are "I forgive you."